Hello Horror Hounds, I'm going to make no bones about this. This review of The Monster Club is going to be brought to you by 100% nostalgia, 0% objectivity. I would have seen The Monster Squad in a period when I was maybe 10, 11, 12, when my dad was recording horror movies off late night TV, the double bills, Universal double bills, Hammer, Amicus movies and the like. And me and my brother would be able to watch them on Saturday when my mum was out of the house doing her Saturday job. It's certainly one of those movies where if you see it when you're young enough, you'll hold it dear to your heart and you'll be able to watch it without a critical eye. It's been about 30 years since I've seen this movie, and I happened upon a clip on YouTube of Vincent Price as the vampire Erasmus explaining the monster's genealogy to John Carradine in The Monster Club. I'll link to that clip down below in the description field, and ever since I saw that clip I ordered the movie and I've been waiting for it to come, getting home from work every day thinking, is this the day that The Monster Club has arrived? And it wasn't, and it wasn't, and it wasn't until yesterday. This is the perfect movie to watch in October. This is a Halloween party of a movie. You have to take your critical hat off and you have to watch it with the glee of the horror-loving child that I was and you were. Let's give a bit of background to the movie. In the 60s and 70s, there was one name in horror, and that was Hammer. There was only one other movie studio that was able to challenge Hammer in any way when it came to horror movies, and that was Amicus Studios. And although they didn't solely produce portmanteau movies, that was really their stock in trade. That's one of the things that separated them from Hammer. The other is that the Hammer look tended to be set in a gothic past with lush sets and gowns and capes and swirling fog and horse-drawn carriages. The Amicus portmanteau movies tended to be based on short story collections, and they tended to be set in the modern day, post-war Britain. They dealt a lot more with class and a lot more with the concerns of the day. What I'm trying to get at is Amicus was definitely its own beast, and for a couple of rounds at least, it was able to go toe-to-toe with Hammer. This isn't an Amicus movie. By the time this comes out in 1981, Hammer is a fading memory, present now only on television with the Hammer House of Horror, and Amicus Studios has also gone the way of all flesh. It is, however, produced by Milton Subotsky, who was one of the two leading names in Amicus. Some see this as a throwback to the old days, the old glory days of Amicus, with the grand old horror names Vincent Price, John Carradine, Donald Pleasance, Patrick McGee, in an era when the face of horror had changed completely. Killers were stalking campsites. In a couple of years, they would be invading your dreams. We'd had The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby. Even commercial horror had stepped up with films like The Omen. And this seemed at the time like a throwback. It was torn to pieces by the critics and sank without a trace. 30 years have been exceedingly kind to the Monster Club. So the hook of the film is that Vincent Price is a starving vampire who happens this night to take his sustenance from his favourite horror writer, R. Chetwynd Hayes. This film is an adaptation of his collection of short stories, The Monster Club, and to pay him back for his kindness and sustaining life force, invites him to the Monster Club to see where the monsters live for inspiration for future books, and there tells him 3 stories of different types of monsters. Interspersed with the stories that Price tells are acts playing at the Monster Club, musical acts. This is a weird kind of mashup of an Amicus portmanteau horror with shades of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, with the post-punk new wave acts, all of them with horror themed songs in the same vein as the Monster Mash, really, whilst at the same time, weirdly, it's got a comic book feel. It's clearly aimed towards a younger audience. Subotsky perhaps trying to avoid the dreaded X certificate that would be doled out like aperitifs at a party to the Amicus movies and the Hammer movies. You have a very campy, very kitschy, tongue-in-cheek, light-hearted, very comic book feel anthology horror movie that seems to predict the coming of movies like Creepshow and Creepshow 2 in a weird sort of way, whilst at the same time being the last gasp, the death rattle really, of a type of horror film whose time has come and long gone. And yes, I know on paper, the Monster Club with all its inhabitants probably sounded more like the Mos Eisley Cantina Bar in Star Wars than the Halloween fancy dress party that you see on screen. If you go with the charm of this movie, you'll love every aspect of it. Yes, the monsters in the Monster Club are clearly people wearing rubber Halloween masks. It's even clearer on the Blu-ray print, which is gorgeous, by the way. If you look at the clip I'll link down to below of the monster's genealogy, check out the lighting, the reds and the greens on the faces of these horror icons as they just sit across a coffin-shaped glass top table and chat about monsters. What's there not to love about that? This is definitely a trick or treat. Kids dressing up for Halloween, eat handfuls of sweets, candy, I believe my American cousins call it, drink lots of root beer, and watch the Monster Club. Listen to the awesome, awful songs. I've had Monsters Rule OK going around in my head now for the last 24 hours, and I don't want to kick it out. I'll also link, there's a video on YouTube to all, to 3 of the songs that appear in the movie. Check them out if you want. If any of that sells you on the kitsch, campy glory of this movie, then I think you can check it out on YouTube. I highly recommend the Blu-ray because the picture is a revelation. Roy Woodbaker shoots the hell out of this movie. The 3 stories are of varying quality, and I've read lots of reviews and lots of people choose a different one for their favourites. The first one, the Shadmuck story, is the one that stuck with me as a kid. If you've seen it as a kid, you'll remember it as the whistling one. They're full of pathos generally, with the monster being the sympathetic character, apart until the middle story is a comedic sort of vampire family living in suburbia story where the vampire hunters are the villains, led by Donald Pleasance, with a groan-inducing punchline at the end. And the final story is played fairly straight, I'll be honest with you, and that introduces the girls and ghouls, and the Hume ghouls. Hume Goos, the hybrid between humans and ghouls, where an American movie director scouting for locations for his next English set horror movie stumbles across a village sort of stuck in time, shrouded in fog, kept away from civilization, that is populated by ghouls and Hume Goos who live on carrion flesh and want him for their next meal. Yes, if I were to step back, an argument could be made that this segment plays a little bit like an amateur theatrics production of Resident Evil 4, but I don't care. I adore the Monster Club. I adore its unassuming charm, the tongue firmly placed in the cheek, the wry winks to the audience. Certainly by now, I would argue that there is a place on your shelf for all kinds of horror. And sometimes I'm in the mood for the most brutal, visceral, nihilistic stuff, and I'll watch The Hills Have Eyes. Sometimes I want to slam through a franchise and I'll work my way through the Halloween movies. Sometimes I want something supernatural. Sometimes I want a nature attacks. At the time it was released, the Monster Club seems like a real anachronism. I'd say now there is definitely space on your shelf for it and have fun with. Especially if you've got young ones. Don't really be guided by the 15 certificate there. This is definitely a movie if you've got kids who like their horror and are looking for the next thing. They can get a certain amount of thrills out of this. Thrills that will stick with them for 30 odd years and they'll remember bits of, oh, the whistling one. Yeah, I mean, that was creepy. What was that story with the guy that whistled? That was really creepy. Oh, what was the one about that foggy village? Yeah, that was weird. Oh, I must check that out again. Without really sending them into the realms of nightmares and not being able to get to sleep. It's charming, it's bright, it's colourful. It's a Halloween party comic book movie come to life, hosted by Vincent Price. There you go. There's your sales pitch. Now that I own this, I'm going to watch this every Halloween. I know it.